Hello, this is Jennifer McGuire and I appreciate you returning for another video. Today I am talking about die cut faux monoprint. Now in my last video I shared how to get a faux monoprint look where you create two backgrounds at once using heat embossing. Well, today I'm doing so using die cuts. It's the same idea but another way to stretch your products. If you didn't catch that video, you might want to watch that too so you can see how that works, but today I'm focusing on dies. I'm also going to show you how to step it up by adding some stamping, and I have loads of examples for you. Let's start with this pair of examples because remember, with this technique you get two backgrounds at once, and for this one I'm going to use a border die. Now I'm going to start out with white cardstock. Any heavyweight white cardstock should work for this. I'm using Neenah Classic Crest Solar White in 110 pound. I have my Waffle Flower Media Matte, which is that white surface that I'm working on. It kind of holds your paper still as you apply ink, so you don't have to get fingerprints on it if you don't want to touch it. I am heavily applying lots of distress ink. You can use any ink that is water reactive. So you can use oxides, you could use any reactive ink, but the distress ink I find works really well, especially in dark colors. And you want to put down as much ink as you can. You can see I put down a lot. You don't have to worry either about getting a perfect blend at all because this technique kind of takes care of it for you. Okay, so now I'm going to die cut from this using a new die from Altenew. This is the Leafy Border Die. You don't even have to wait for the background to dry. You can go ahead and die cut it right away. Any die cut machine will work. I'm using my Gemini Junior for my die cutting today. I do that off screen because I have it built into a drawer, but you'll see me use my Spellbinders Platinum 6 also throughout this video, so I just use both. Okay, so now I'm going to just pop out the little negative pieces and we end up with this really detailed, beautiful open border. Now I'm just going to set that aside and do another inked background using that same die. So I'm listing my colors up there. Sorry, my head gets in the way. You can see how I'm just very heavily adding the ink to the white cardstock. Direct to paper is best because that's a great way to get a lot of ink down at once. And by the way, I'm just doing two of these at once because I'm going to use the same die on each. So I went ahead and get my die cutting done and then we'll move on to the rest of the technique. Okay, so now I'm just going to trim these down. The end of these border dies are open, so you can do some fun techniques with them, but I'm just going to cut right along the edge so you can see that beautiful detail that we get. So now I have two pieces that we can use to move on to the next step. So this is the faux monoprint technique. Now for this, I am just using a little purple tape to create a hinge between our inked piece and a piece of white cardstock. Again, heavyweight, smooth white cardstock is best. You could also use colored cardstock if you want. Now, since I'm doing this all at once, I might as well go ahead and put a little hinge at the end of this border piece also and attach it to some white cardstock. So you could do these one at a time, but I figured why not do them both at once. Next, you need a water bottle so that you can spray that inked portion generously with water. I'm covering up the white piece that's taped to it so it doesn't get wet, and I'm just spraying this pretty generously. You can see how much I'm putting down. It absorbs the water pretty much right away. You don't see any puddles on there. That's okay. You want to put down a good amount of water, then take it right away over to your die cut machine, and you're going to run it through your die cut machine as if you were running a piece of cardstock and a die. So I'm just putting it between my two cutting plates and going back and forth. No die is used here. All I'm doing is squishing these papers together. I'm going to go back and forth 2 or 3 times kind of slowly, and then I'm going to set that aside for a moment. I'm going to go ahead and do my other piece, the inked border piece. So I have this, I'm just going to set it aside. Okay, so there's my inked border piece with the white cardstock hinged to it, covering up the white and spraying the inked part pretty generously with water. Again, I spray it so that I have it completely covered and it's absorbing the water, no puddles. Okay, so now I am putting that folded through my die cut machine, running it back and forth a few times to smush that down too. So now we can open up both of our pieces. However, sometimes that wet cardstock wants to stick to the white cardstock piece. And with these intricate pieces, I don't want to tear them. So I find that if I heat set it a bit before pulling it apart, it'll come apart easily and I don't have to worry about tearing anything. So that's why I added the heat to it first. You could also just let it sit and air dry if you wanted. And now when I peel those apart, check it out. We have 2 pieces on each. So we have the inked piece that's now lighter, and some of that ink transferred to the plain white cardstock on both of these. So now I can just cut the hinge apart, and I have 2 backgrounds from each of these. I will turn these all into cards later in this video, so stay tuned for that. I just first want to show you a bunch of different examples for how you can do this with different types of dyes and even incorporate some stamping. Okay, let's move on to another example. Again, I have my Distress ink colors listed up there on the top. I usually go direct to paper, and then I come in with my ink blending tool to kind of blend between the 2 colors just a little bit. I just didn't want any harsh lines. You could definitely do stripes if you wanted to with masking, anything you want. While I have my inks out, I might as well do another background. I'm going to do 2 with my next die set. Once again, might as well do more than 1 at a time. So I have 2 inked backgrounds. Now for this, I'm using the new Altenew Hanging Garden die set. I really like this die set because they're large and they're detailed and fill a card nicely. So there's 2 dies in the set. On the pink and purple background, I'll use the larger die, and on the green and blue background, I'm going to die cut with the smaller of the 2 dies. Now here's a little trick I wanted to share with you. If you ever die cut and you see how that die cut is still in the paper and all the pieces are still inside, if you want to keep those organized or all still together, all you have to do is put some tape on the back of it. I'm using purple tape, which is kind of temporary, so I can now flip this over and pull the die cut out with all the little inlaid pieces included. And that way they're all intact, I'm not losing any little pieces. I could even trim that down and add it to a card as is. But it's a great way to keep track of all those bits. Now here I'm going to taking the die cut itself off, and I still have all the inlay pieces there if I wanted them. Okay, I'm going to do that to the other 2. Now I ended up not using the little inlay pieces, those little tiny inside pieces, but I wanted to show you that trick in case you ever wanted to keep them. Okay, so now let's do a hinge. This time I'm using a super light blue or pool color cardstock instead of white. So I'm covering that up and then adding a generous amount of water to this. By the way, it doesn't matter if that Distress ink background that you're spraying on is completely dry or just freshly inked. It doesn't matter at all. When you spray it generously with water, it reactivates the ink. So now I'm going to close that hinge and run it back and forth through my die cut machine. So the pressure of the die cut machine squishes those together, transferring some of the ink from our inked piece to our light blue background. And then check that out. We have 2 backgrounds from our negative space, which is just a great way to use your inked pieces more. And look how smooth and soft and suede-like those backgrounds look. And I still have my inked die cut here. This wasn't part of the monoprint, so I could do monoprint with this inked die cut, but I decided to save it with that dark color ink, and you'll see what I'll do with it later on in this video. Okay, now I have that other piece, the pink and purple background where we die cut the larger of the 2 leaf images. Now from this, I'm going to do kind of the same thing. I have the ink to negative space here, and I'm going to tape it to create a hinge with some light pink cardstock. I'm spraying it generously with water, folding it closed, putting it through my cutting plates and going back and forth a few times. This transfers some of the ink onto our light pink background. So there you can see the soft, smooth, suede-like look you get with that. So now I can cut those apart and just let them dry or heat set them. Now in this case, I thought I would take the leaf die cut that we have, the inked leaf die cut, and do monoprint with it too. So I have plain white cardstock in my die cut machine. Now I'm spraying the inked die cut itself generously with water. I'm going to pick this up with tweezers. You could use your fingers. I end up using my fingers in the end, laying it right down onto the white cardstock, putting the other cutting plate on top, and running back and forth. Now this is a very intricate, delicate die or die cut, so what I'm going to do is heat set it from both sides until it starts to dry. Then I kind of slide my craft pick underneath the die cut and peel it away from the background because I don't want it to tear when I do this. I want to save both the die cut and the background. So check this out. Our inked die cut transferred some of the ink into the paper. It actually leaves a little impression too. I can still use this inked die cut, and now I have that cool background. So here's a closer look at that background. It's really pretty. It looks kind of like it was watercolored, but it also has a little impression to it. It's really cool, and I don't really know any other way to get such a unique look. So this is a great way to get new looks out of your die cuts. One thing that's important to note is that when you do this faux monoprint, you'll get a mirror image. You can see how these are two mirror images of each other. And I'll talk more about that later. Let's do another example. This time I'm using the new Altenew Spring Roses die set. All three of these are included together, and I like that there are 3 different ones so you can cover a card front and do many different things with them. I'm going to use 2 of them for today's example. So I have an inked background here, and I'm going to die cut 2 of the Spring Roses dies from the inked background. Doesn't matter where, because I'm just going to use the die cuts and not the background. I could use the negative space if I wanted to, but I really just need the die cuts for what I plan to do. Okay, so I'm going to pop all those little inside pieces out, and we're going to do monoprint with the roses themselves. I have white cardstock here, and I sprayed both of my inked die cuts generously with water off screen. And now I'm laying the wet die cuts down, face down, onto my white cardstock background. I'm kind of trying to decide where to place it. Now I am putting my cutting plate on top, running back and forth. And that pink and orange and purple ink is going to transfer from my die cut onto my background. So I end up with a lighter colored die cut, an inked impression on my white cardstock background. Okay, so I heat set that a little bit so I could start peeling it off. You just want to be slow and careful here. You can see it ends up coming off, no problem. And you can see why I do recommend using a heavyweight cardstock. If you use a thin cardstock, I think the die cut would be too frail to pull away. There you can see that beautiful inked impression. It looks kind of like letterpress, but not as deep. Okay, next I wanted to show you that this works great with background dies. So I have the Altenew Garden Trellis Die here. It's a new one. And I had inked up cardstock with distress ink, and then I die cut it using that trellis background die. Now I'm creating a little hinge on the bottom of our ink die cut and adding it to a piece of cardstock. So again, I'm just doing 2 to save time. Okay, so now, as always, I'm going to spray my inked die cut generously with water. I did that off screen, folding it closed and running it back and forth through my die cut machine. And then you can see how that transfers the ink over to the cardstock. This is great with background dies. Now for the other one, I ended up switching it to a light pool cardstock. I sprayed up the inked die cut off screen, putting it between my cutting plates, running back and forth, and we transfer some color once again. So background dies cost more than regular dies, obviously, and this is a great way to get more from your background dies. So the pieces on the right are perfectly smooth, great for one layer techniques. And I started out with 2 ink die cuts, but now I have 4 backgrounds. Okay, now I wanted to show you how you can incorporate some heat embossing faux monoprint in with your die cutting monoprint. If you didn't watch my last video, again, you might want to check that out. I'm going to pull the 2 ideas together. So this time I have an inked background. So covered it with distress ink on white cardstock, and I heat set it completely. The reason I heat set it is we're going to heat emboss on it. You want your background to be dry, so you get a clean heat embossing. I stamped the Altenew Swiss Dots background onto my inked cardstock using VersaMark Ink, and then I added clear embossing powder and I'll heat set it. What this does is it traps that ink color underneath the heat embossing, but everything outside of the heat embossing will react with water when we do our technique. Now it's time for the faux die cut monoprint technique. I have my Spring Rose die. I'm going to tape that in place and run that through my die cut machine. I'll save the die cut for another card. I'm going to take the background, the negative space, tape it to some white cardstock, spray the inked portion generously with water, fold it, run it through my die cut machine a few times, and then carefully peel it apart. And now when I open it up, you'll see how where there are heat embossed dots on the left, it ends up being white dots on the right, because anything under the heat embossing isn't reacting with the water, so nothing transfers in the dot areas. So now I have these 3 pieces that I can turn into 3 different cards. Okay, so now that we've created a bunch of pieces, let's start making cards, and I have some additional ideas for you. Now, one thing to keep in mind is a lot of these pieces have a little bit of curling to them because so much water was involved. What I do is I take a piece of folded printer paper, thin paper. I put my piece inside of it and run it through my laminator. The heat and pressure flattens them, and look how nice and smooth these are. No more warping. So I did that to all of my pieces before I started making my cards. Okay, I'll show you all of the cards that I made. Let's start with this first one where I added some additional stamping to one of my backgrounds. Let's start with that center die cut. This is one of my inked die cuts that I didn't do monoprint with. I'm gluing it onto 2 additional white die cuts so it has dimension to it. I use my E6000 spray adhesive between the layers. I normally don't like to use spray adhesives, but when I have a lot of intricate die cuts like this, it is a time saver. So for this card, I took the inked die cut and added 2 white die cuts behind it. Okay, now for the negative space piece, I wanted to stamp on it. So I have the Altenew Dotted Diamonds background stamp, and I put it in my Misty stamping tool. Here's the negative space. I have a little temporary adhesive on the back of it. I'm lining it up with the dotted pattern of the stamp so that it's straight. Now I'm going to close my Misty upside down, flip it over, and now I know that the dotted pattern lines up straight onto our inked background piece. I'm using a mint color Altenew Dye Ink, and I'll stamp this on the background. This ink will soften as it dries. I wanted something very subtle for that. You could use a darker ink if you wanted to have darker results. Okay, next I'm going to glue that onto a piece of white cardstock so that there's a backing to that opening in the middle. Now I have my stacked die cut that I'm going to glue right in place. I have adhesive on the back of it already. I'm just popping it right into that negative space. Now remember, this inked die cut, it matches that background perfectly but is darker because it wasn't part of the monoprint. The background is lighter because we did the faux monoprint. Okay, so now I'm just going to trim that piece down, and I added a white mat on the right and bottom sides because I'm going to put this in the top left corner of my card. Now to put some dimension behind this, I have some white cardstock pieces here that were left over from the white cardstock that I cut for my stamp inserts. And I put a few pieces back there for some added dimension. You could use craft foam or foam tape if you prefer. This was just a way for me to use up those scraps I had. Once I have that built up, I can add this to the top left corner of my card. But I thought first to add something interesting to my white note card. So I'm using the Altenew Dotted Swirls Debossing die, a favorite of mine that I use a lot. I have a white note card here, and I'm going to tape the die to the front flap of the note card. I'll run that through my die cut machine. This die doesn't cut, but instead makes little piercings in a pattern. It's subtle and kind of hard to see in the video, but it's there, and it adds a lot of detail to the final card. And now I can add my inked piece to the top left corner of the note card. For a sentiment, I'm using the new Altenew Bold Thanks die set. This die set has the thanks shadow and the word thanks itself. I die cut the shadow twice from white cardstock and glued them together. Then I die cut the word thanks from black cardstock twice and glued those on top. So there's a lot of dimension to them. I then used my Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen to add shimmer to the word thanks and to our inked die cut. And now I'm adding Ranger Glossy accents onto the letters too. When that glossy accents dries with that shimmer pen underneath it, it gets really sparkly in real life. Okay, so here is a look at the final results. You can see the subtle stamping that we have on our inked background. And remember, this inked background is a little bit softer and smooth and suede-like looking because we did that monoprint technique. You can also see the detail that we get on the white note card from that debossing die. By the way, the sending stamped image right in front of the word thanks is from this Altenew Leaf Canopy stamp set. You can tell I've used this set many times, used it a lot in videos, and throughout the rest of this video, I will be using sentiments from this stamp many times. Okay, let's next look at the partner panel to the one we just created. This is the faux monoprint of it. So it's a reverse image and it's much softer looking, and I did it on light blue cardstock. Now, since it's the reverse, I have to get a little creative with adding die cuts to it. So let me just show you what I mean. I have the same die here that I used for my background. and I'm die cutting it from white cardstock. I'm sliding out of my die cut machine, and now I have a piece of printer paper, very thin cardstock, folded. I'm taking my die cut out and I'm putting it into that folded cardstock, and I'll run it through my die cut machine to squish it. Have you ever noticed that when you die cut cardstock, there's one side, the front of the die cut, that looks nice and smooth, and the back doesn't look as nice? I need the back side to show this time. So by smushing it between that folded paper, it smooths out the back of the die cut. So all of these little pieces I'm gluing down onto my panel are actually upside down. You're seeing the back of the die cut. But because we squished it, we smoothed it, and it looks nice. So I thought it'd be fun to just use the inlay pieces, the inside pieces of this die cut, and glue it right in place so you could see the light blue outline on our background panel. After I glued the white pieces in place, I have a thanks die cut. This is the Altenew Fancy Thanks. I've used it many, many times. I die cut it 3 times from black cardstock, glued them together for a stacked look, and now I'm adding it right on top of our background. And of course, I'm using my T-ruler to make sure that I glued it down straight. For the background, I'm using the Altenew Garden Trellis Die. This is a nice die with a universal kind of feel to it. You can use it with pretty much any style of card. I die cut it from white cardstock, and I'm adding it onto a white note card. So it's just a little bit of texture on the back of our simple card. Now I have our inked panel here. I added a few pieces of extra cardstock to the back of it for dimension, and there you can see the finished card. Now you can tell by looking at this, this is the monoprint impression from the negative space die cut piece that we used on our last card. So it's got this soft suede-like look, and you can see the outline of our die cut, and I just filled it in with white inlay pieces. So it's not actually an inlay technique, but I used the pieces on top to give kind of that look. Okay, let's look at our next pair of examples. We have this one, the original inked piece, and then the card where we have the panel where we transferred some ink to it. So this uses the border dies. So I trimmed the lighter piece down, and I added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. I wanted to add a little finishing trim to this, so I'm using my T-ruler to apply a straight line of liquid adhesive. Then I have a very thin piece of white cardstock that I cut from a scrap that I'll push up right against the T-ruler. This will ensure that this is straight, and I have a nice look, what looks like a little trim on the edge of our inked piece. And I'll go ahead and do it to the other side also. So that piece there in the center is very smooth. This is the piece where we transferred the ink when we did our faux monoprint technique. I really like the soft look of that. Okay, after I trimmed off the excess of those little white strips, I added a Altenew Fancy Thanks die cut in black cardstock. And I also added a few pearls to the background. I white heat embossed You Are the Best on a black cardstock strip. Now my thanks die cut does have 3 stacked together for dimension, so I added a few thin strips of black cardstock behind our black stamp sentiment too, so it stands up too. I'm really liking using leftover scraps to build up dimension. I find it's less wasteful, it's less expensive, and it holds up even better when going through the mail. There you can see the beautiful ink impression that you get by doing this faux monoprint technique. It kind of looks like an impressed watercolor. It's really cool. And by the way, the You Are the Best sentiment comes from this Altenew Stone Mosaic stamp set, which has a lot of nice small sentiments that are great for creating little sentiment strips to go with word die cuts. Okay, now let's look at the partner piece, this one here. This is the one that we originally inked, and it became a little bit lighter when we did the transfer. And here you can see I built it up on 2 additional Leafy Border Die cuts, and then added the white cardstock strips to the edge for that finishing trim. I also added a few pearls in the middle, and then I used the Bold Thanks die cut once again with a dark green or teal cardstock for the word thanks itself. Now remember, I did 2 pairs of panels using the leafy border, so let's create the other pair of cards. This is the piece where we originally inked for the monoprint technique. I trimmed it down a little bit to add onto the front of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. And I die cut 3 additional panels to glue behind it for dimension. I also added some iridescent gemstones to the opening, and then the bold thanks die cut with black cardstock with a white shadow. And once again, I added some Aqua Shimmer pen, the Shimmer, to the die cut word just to make it stand out even more. Now the partner piece to this, the lighter version where we had transferred ink onto a smooth piece of white cardstock, I wanted to add some stamping to it. So I have it here and I'm going to mask off the center area so the stamping doesn't go there. And I just use purple tape to do that quickly. I have once again my Altenew Swiss dot stamp, which I think is my most used stamp of all time. Put a bit of adhesive on the back of our inked piece, lined it up with the dot pattern, flip my MISTI over to close it, and now we can stamp it and all the dots will be straight. I'm using a mint colored ink here to stamp onto the background, and this ink again will soften as it dries, so it'll be a subtle dot to the background. I can remove my tape carefully, and there we have a very smooth 1-layer piece that has the look of a lot of texture to it, but it's nice and smooth. So I went ahead and heat set that with my heat gun. Whenever I stamp onto inked background, I like to heat set it right away so it stays crisp. So I trimmed that down and added it to a white note card and put a few gems in the open area. I also stacked a few thanks die cuts, the top one being a dark teal color, and added some shimmer pen to that too. So you can see how you can add stamping to your faux monoprint backgrounds just for a little more interest. I like the softer kind of faux watercolor look to this. I struggle with watercolor, so this kind of look is fun for me to achieve. Okay, this next one is one of my favorites where I just use my monoprint of a die cut. So I have this simple piece here. I'm putting a little adhesive on the back, lining it up once again with the dot pattern, making sure it's straight, flipping my stamping tool over, and that transfers the paper onto my MISTI so it's ready to stamp on. I'm inking this up with a frosty pink ink, a light pink ink, and I'm stamping right over our faux monoprint impression. Remember, this background was created by starting with white cardstock, inking up a die cut heavily with distress ink, spraying it with water, pressing it onto this white with a die cut machine, and there we're good to go. We get this beautiful watercolor looking impression. So I trimmed that down and added it to a light pink note card, and then added a black die cut Altenew Fancy Thanks die cut. So there are 3 glued together there with some Aqua Shimmer pen on top. And then I stamped Thinking of You with black ink, and that is from the Leaf Canopy stamp set I showed you earlier. I also have the die cut still left over from this that I can save for a future card. Okay, let's take the partner piece to that. This is the piece where we originally inked it up with lots of distress ink, die cut the leaf from the center, and sprayed it with water. So it has a little bit of a darker feel to it with the die cut opening in the center. I thought I would use that Debossing die once again to add that dot pattern to it. Again, this doesn't cut, but instead creates a bunch of pierced dots in a pattern, and it adds interest to a simple background. I added this onto a white note card, and now I have a stacked white die cut, the same die, that I'm popping into place, popping into that opening and gluing it there. So because my die cut is stacked, it stands out even more. Then I'll flip it over and run my bone folder over it just to make sure it's all adhered. If you prefer, you could glue just one white die cut into the opening for a smooth inlay look. Okay, so I finished this off by adding the bold thanks die cut to the center. The shadow is cut from white cardstock, but the letters thanks themselves I cut from a holographic cardstock, so it would catch the light, kind of draw some interest. I also added some silver pearls and then added a You Are the Best sentiment from the Altenew Leaf Canopy stamp set. And remember, I still have the inked die cut left over that I can use on a card. So far we've made 3 from that technique. However, we still have one more piece left over. Remember that. We have the one where we transferred some of the ink, the negative space, to some light pink cardstock. So I have this 4th card also. So what I did is I glued that panel down to a white note card, And then you can see I used the little inside pieces of a white die cut. Remember, those are upside down. I showed you that technique earlier where I smoothed them out. And I glued them into the pink opening on our background. Wanted to keep this card simple, so I added a new Altenew Hello die cut from black cardstock right on top, and then added some iridescent gemstones around it to catch the light. So here you can see how I glued those white inside pieces right on top of that pink faux monoprint. So that just adds a little dimension to it. Now this next example I think is my favorite from the bunch because I used both the faux monoprint impressed background along with the inked die cut on one card. So you can see there in the background the faux monoprint impression, and then in the center is the inked die cut. Now to do this, I needed to create a white die cut with all the pieces still in the inside. There are a few ways you can do this, but this is the easiest. I die cut it, but I kept all the pieces in the die. On the back, I'm going to put tape. So all the little pieces are taped in place. This is micropore tape, but any tape would work. So that when I remove this die cut, all the pieces stay there in their spot. And then I can just cut the excess tape off the edges. So now I have a die cut with all the white pieces in the inside, and I can glue my inked die cut on top of that. It's a huge time saver instead of doing like an inlay and trimming around the edges. So I have that die cut right there in the center. I added it with some foam tape. And then the background is the faux monoprint that we did of that same die cut. Remember how we took 2 inked die cuts, sprayed them with water, laid them onto white cardstock, ran it through our die cut machine. That's how we did the background. And I took one of those inked die cuts and added it to the center. I also added a Thinking of You white heat embossed sentiment, once again, from the Altenew Leaf Canopy stamp set. Okay, let's move on to our backgrounds where we did the dotted heat embossing on the background too to add to the faux monoprint look. So I have the negative space here. This is the piece where we did the inking and then the die cutting from the center. I glued it onto a light blue piece of cardstock, and now I am adding right into the opening a stacked white die cut. So I wanted a little blue to show through the center of that rose die cut. I then added some little white pearls and then a Hello die cut. That is from the Altenew Hugs and Hello die cut set, which includes the shadow and the words themselves for hello and hugs. And I use these quite a bit. Now remember, this was a dark inked background and I clear heat embossed the dots on top. So the clear heat embossing trapped that dark color underneath, but then when we did the faux monoprint, all the area around the embossing got softer and lighter when we transferred the ink to another piece of cardstock. So it gives a really cool, unique look. So here is the partner card. This is the panel that was white cardstock that we transferred ink to and ended up with a mirror image of the die cut. So I created a mirrored stacked die cut using the trick of squashing the cardstock to make it smooth. And the top one is a blue cardstock, and I just popped it right over the opening on our background. I also added a thanks die cut, the fancy thanks from Altenew, right on top, and then a few pearls around it, a very simple card design. So now we have a mirror image of the roses from the last card, and I think that's a fun way to really change the look of your dies. And using that trick to smooth out your upside down die cuts really makes a big difference. Okay, for this card, I'm using the faux monoprint that we did with the garden trellis background die. You can see how I get that really soft impression in the background. Now for this, I also used the Altenew Craft a Flower Tulip dies. Altenew is coming out, I think, every month with a new layered die cut set. That's a flower. And these are really beautiful. You can see the layering guide there. Makes it easy to figure out how to assemble them. And I'm actually mass producing a bunch of peach tulips for cards right now, but I thought for this card I'd do my make-believe pool colored tulips. So I just layered my die cuts according to the instructions and glued them on to our faux monoprint background. And that is trimmed down to fit onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card. In the center, I used the Altenew Hugs and Hello die cut set, and I did the shadow from white cardstock and then the word hello itself from dark pool cardstock. So there you can see how the faux monoprint is a great look to have as a background or a backdrop to a focal point arrangement. And the best part is I have all of these pieces left over. Ran out of time to use all of these on cards, but that's the good thing about this technique. You can create 2, 3, 4 cards from one run of the technique. So I hope you'll give this technique a try. You can see it works with many dyes you have already. I don't recommend doing it with word dyes as you get that mirror image monoprint, and that doesn't work well with words. Anyways, if you're interested in checking out the products I use, they are linked below in my YouTube description. In the middle here are the other 2 monoprint, faux monoprint videos that I've mentioned. And you can head to my blog for much more information. Thanks for spending this time with me today, and I'll see you again very soon.